They fired her from the space program. Not quietly, not with regret, but with cold bureaucracy. Helen Royce watched her badge, once a symbol of genius, now a mark of disgrace, drop into a file box. "You're too much of a risk," the director said. "Too outspoken. Too doomsday." She left the Kennedy Center with nothing but a folder of classified data and a heart full of dread. Because Helen knew something no one else believed. She had seen it in the numbers, the patterns in solar flares, the silent anomalies at the edge of the atmosphere, the flicker in the satellite feeds. A threat no one wanted to acknowledge. Not aliens, not war, but collapse. Something subtle, systemic, inevitable. Helen tried to warn them. They laughed, they demoted her, they erased her. But Helen Royce refused to disappear. She retreated to the only place she trusted, a patch of land in the Nevada desert, ringed by silent mesas and endless blue sky. She built a home, then a lab, then something deeper. A shelter. Not just a bunker, a self-sustaining underground world, solar arrays, hydroponic towers, fusion batteries cobbled from prototypes. Everything she'd learned from a decade in space systems, twisted for survival. The years passed. Helen became a ghost in the world's eye. Rumors spread of the mad engineer in the desert, of a woman who never left her compound, of an outcast building something nobody could understand. But Helen didn't care. She watched the skies, she kept her data. She prepared. The warning signs came, quietly at first. Satellites vanished from orbit, climate patterns snapped, auroras raged over the equator. The world's grids began to fail. Governments blamed hackers, then blamed each other. Helen knew it was bigger. She knew when the first blackout swept the East Coast, when comms went down in Moscow and Mumbai, when GPS signals fizzled and died. She stood in the cool dark of her control center, hands trembling as data scrolled across a dozen screens. This was it. The thing she'd seen coming, the reason they'd called her paranoid. Helen Royce was ready. The collapse was not a bang, but a wave. Systems fell one by one. Air travel ceased, highways filled with stranded cars, and the internet became static. In cities, food vanished from shelves in hours. Water stopped running. Emergency broadcasts played, then faded. Panic swept the globe. Helen watched from her surveillance grid, crowds looting, governments collapsing, fires on the horizon. But at the compound, all was silent. Helen double-checked her oxygen reserves, then her power grid, then the automated defense turrets. She locked the main entrance, a steel door 2 feet thick, then activated the underground living sectors. She waited. The first survivors came a week later. A family, mother, father, of 2 children, stumbling down the highway, faces burnt by sun and fear. Helen's cameras spotted them long before they reached the gate. She let them in. They could not believe the underground gardens, the steady lights, the cool air. "Who are you?" the father whispered. "Call me Helen," she said, "and welcome home. If you're willing to work, you can stay." News spread by word of mouth, desperate radio, half-broken comms. Within days, dozens arrived, then hundreds. Engineers, nurses, DAC farmhands, children, broken people with nothing left but the will to live. Helen set rules. No weapons, no hoarding. Everyone worked, everyone learned. Some chafed at the discipline, but most understood this was not a democracy nor a dictatorship. It was survival. Helen barely slept. She trained volunteers in hydroponics, power management, emergency medical care. She broke up fights, comforted the grieving, made hard decisions, rationing food, prioritizing repairs, isolating the sick. Inside, she was exhausted, her mind sometimes cracking under pressure. But outside, she was unyielding. Survivors came with stories: wars over water, rogue militias, endless heat and blackout. Some begged her to expand the compound, to risk the unknown for a chance at more. But Helen knew the limits of her design. "If we grow too fast, we die," she said. "This shelter isn't a miracle, it's a lifeboat." Still, she lay awake at night, haunted by those she'd turned away. Yet when dawn came, she rose and kept building the world that everyone else had lost. As the months passed, the outside world vanished for good. The sky was a dirty orange by day, starless black by night. Dust storms roared across the desert. Distant mountains disappeared behind a curtain of haze. Inside the shelter, a new society formed, uneasy, fragile, but determined. Helen established councils for food, repairs, education, and security. Children returned to lessons, learning not only math and history, but how to purify water and grow tomatoes in nutrient gel. But it wasn't perfect. Arguments broke out about rationing, about privacy, about the strange engineer who never slept and trusted few. Some accused Helen of hoarding secrets. Others whispered that she monitored every word, every step. Helen heard it all. She let them argue. She even let them elect representatives, knowing real democracy was an illusion in a closed system. When epidemics struck, or filters failed, or an airlock jammed, she intervened directly. Respect grew, so did resentment. But the shelter survived. One morning, alarms screamed across the compound. Helen sprinted to the control center, heart pounding. Sensors on the perimeter wall showed movement, many figures organized, advancing from the northeast. Raiders. She sealed the outer gates and activated defensive turrets. All residents to shelter zones, her voice echoed over intercoms. The raiders, desperate, armed, ruthless, tried to breach the walls. Some carried explosives, others homemade weapons. Helen's drones fired stun rounds and tear gas. Alarms blared, gasps and screams echoed underground. For 2 hours, the siege raged. A handful of defenders on the upper level repelled the few who broke through. Helen herself led a team sealing breached vents with emergency foam, moving faster than anyone thought possible. When the last intruders were driven off or captured, the shelter was scarred, but whole. The survivors looked at Helen with new eyes. Some called her hero. Some tyrant. She didn't care. The shelter held. The attack was a warning. From then on, Helen hardened security. She appointed a trusted security chief, recruited engineers to repair and reinforce vulnerable sections, and expanded hydroponics deeper underground, away from any future breach. But even safety had a cost. Supplies dwindled. Tensions rose. A group led by a charismatic former lawyer, Keisha Grant, began to challenge Helen's authority openly. They wanted more say in food distribution, more transparency in resource management, more freedom to leave the compound if they wished. Helen called a meeting in the central forum. "We have 2 choices," she said, voice clear. "We can fight each other, or we can survive together. This shelter saved us, but only if we act as one." She offered to open records, to share data, to rotate leadership roles in non-critical sectors. Keisha grudgingly accepted. The people, for now, agreed. But Helen knew peace was temporary. The real test was yet to come. The seasons outside no longer mattered. Inside, time was measured in harvest cycles, power audits, and the soft shuffle of feet in narrow corridors. Children celebrated birthdays with homemade candles. Old songs once forgotten drifted through sleeping quarters at night. Yet isolation wore on everyone. Some grew restless, dreaming of sun, rain, open air. Keisha Grant and her circle pushed for controlled expeditions outside, hoping to find other survivors or at least evidence of a future. Helen argued it was too soon. "We're not ready," she warned. "Our systems are stable, but one mistake could doom us all." After tense debate, a small team set out under strict conditions, wearing homemade filter masks and dosimeters. They returned shaken but alive, bringing news. The world above was a wasteland. Burned houses, dead rivers, ruined highways. No signal, no friendly faces. Still, even a taste of sky gave the shelter hope. People clung to small things, planting flowers in hydroponic corners, painting murals of forests and oceans. The old world was gone, but inside these walls, a new one grew. As the shelter stabilized, Helen's leadership was both respected and feared. She was always present, fixing a jammed pump, diagnosing a power surge, comforting a grieving parent. But Helen kept her own pain hidden. She missed the stars. She missed the sense of wonder, the dream of reaching out instead of digging in. Late at night, she walked the maintenance tunnels alone, haunted by memories of the space program, the friends she'd lost, the mission that never launched. One evening, a child, Anna, age 7, followed her into the dark. "Do you ever wish you could go back?" Anna whispered. Helen knelt, brushing dust from the girl's cheek. "I wish I could bring back what we lost," she answered. "But what we build here, that's all that matters now." They walked together, their footsteps echoing. In the silence, Helen found a measure of peace. As years passed, the shelter changed. Children grew tall, elders grew frail. New skills replaced old habits. Elections became routine, new leaders rising with every cycle. Helen aged, but never slowed. She recorded lessons: engineering, biology, survival. So even after she was gone, her knowledge would remain. Some days she glimpsed hope for the world beyond. Green shoots through cracks in the shelter's ceiling. Birds glimpsed through security cameras. Rumors spread. of distant radio signals, faint and stuttering. Other survivors? A future beyond these walls? Helen smiled when she heard them. She encouraged optimism, but cautioned patience. We survived because we prepared, she told her people. We'll rebuild because we remember. Inside the shelter, life endured, and Helen Royce, once fired and forgotten, had become not just a savior, but the mother of a new world. But peace could not last forever. A winter storm of historic scale battered the desert above, collapsing old access tunnels and damaging solar panels. Energy reserves dropped dangerously low. Helen, now gray-haired but as tireless as ever, led repair teams herself, wading through icy water, recalibrating circuits, braving winds that threatened to tear away what little they had. Inside, morale faltered, supplies ran low. Some whispered that the shelter wouldn't survive another season. Old arguments flared, Keisha and her followers demanding more transparency, some even speaking of leaving to risk the outside. Helen called a council. This shelter was built for crisis, she said. But crisis is what reveals who we are. We can quit now, or we can stand together. If we lose hope, we lose everything. That night, people rallied. Families pooled resources, mechanics repaired turbines from scavenged parts, gardeners worked round the clock under grow lamps. It wasn't easy, but the shelter survived the storm. Helen watched from the main hatch as snow melted, proud of the resilience she had fostered. Spring brought a miracle. The radio, silent for so long, suddenly buzzed with a clear, strong signal. To any survivors, Oasis Station reports stable crops, room for new arrivals. Repeat, this is Oasis. A real community, somewhere out there, had survived and was calling out. The shelter erupted in cautious celebration, laughter, music, even tears. Helen led a scouting party across the battered land, following weak beacons through ruined canyons and broken highways. Days later they arrived. Oasis Station was real, a pocket of life among endless ruin, led by people who, like Helen, had prepared and persevered. An alliance formed, trade routes opened, seeds for tools, knowledge for labor. Children met children from other communities. A new hope grew, stronger than any machine or rule. Helen, for the first time in years, slept a night without fear. Time passed. The shelter became a legend, a story whispered in new settlements and sung by children who never knew the world before. Helen Royce, once fired and forgotten, was honored as the architect of their survival. Statues were never built, but every garden, every sturdy wall, every thriving child was a monument to her stubborn hope. In her final years, Helen watched the desert bloom with new green, watched her people build not just to survive, but to live. She died quietly, surrounded by family, biological and chosen. Her lessons, her systems, her spirit endured. The world outside would never be the same, but it would endure. And somewhere, beneath the desert sky, the shelter still hummed. A lifeboat, a cradle, a second chance for humankind. Years later, as the world healed, children played atop the old hatch buried in sagebrush and wildflowers. They knew only stories of the darkness, of the endless storm, of the ghost engineer who built a home beneath the earth when all others laughed. Their parents taught them Helen Royce's lessons. Prepare for the unthinkable. Share what you have. Never turn away a neighbor in need. In distant cities, new satellites rose and flickered in the sky. People farmed again, wrote new books, painted the walls of their homes in colors the old world had forgotten. But in every settlement, large and small, they carried a piece of the shelter's spirit, a belief that survival was possible, and that rebuilding was a duty shared by all. On the day a memorial garden was planted where Helen's shelter once stood, an elder stood before the community. She spoke quietly, voice steady. We survived because one woman saw what others could not. We flourished because she refused to let the world end. And the children, laughing, ran through sunlight and new green, the past a distant shadow. In that moment, the shelter was not just steel and circuits, but a living memory, a testament that hope, once buried, could outlast even the end of the world.